Today I'm going to be discussing the October crisis of 1970. The crisis was something that not only shocked Canada, but the entire world. On the 5th of October, 1970, a separatist and nationalist group entitled the Fonds de Libération du Québec, or the FLQ, kidnapped British Trade Commissioner James Cross. They then released to the public a manifesto and a list of demands, which the current Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau denied them. So 5 days later, they kidnapped the Quebec Minister of Labour, Pierre Laporte. This prompted the government to do something never before seen in a non-warring period. They enacted the War Measures Act. And tragically, this story ends with the murder of Pierre Laporte at the hands of the FLQ. But what could push a group to feel so strongly about Quebec nationalism and Quebec as an independent nation that they resulted in such horrific, violent acts? This group did not just appear overnight. They were the result of nearly 4 centuries of oppression by the hands of the English. It goes back historically to the roots of Canada. It goes back politically decades and decades between English and French Canadians, and it involves cultural stigma around French and the French Canadian culture. Historically, French and English Canada have been at odds ever since they both first landed here. With the French colonizing New France in 1534 and the British colonizing the Americas in 1607, the French were reluctant to give up the lands that they had claimed to first. Yet still, after months of battles, after months of fighting and sieges, James Wolfe took Montreal in 1759, and the French officially signed over the land to the English in 1760. After this, things kind of went downhill for the French citizens who were now living under British rule for the first time. The Anglican way of life became synonymous with the best way of life, meaning British supremacy over the French, and it completely devalued and oppressed the French citizens that were now under British rule. The French were mostly Protestants, so this also came into play when they were oppressed due to religion, and it had been common to be Protestant up until the Great British Succession, and now they were forced out of it. Many people believe that British domination over many parts of the New World was indeed inevitable, but the subsequent ostracization of the French culture and people were certainly not. Politically, French Canadians have been severely underrepresented in Parliament and government affairs since they first relinquished to the British. There have actually only ever been 2 Prime Ministers of Canada who were born in Quebec, those being Sir Wilfrid Laurier and Sir John Abbott. French-Canadian politicians were often ostracized from politics, and this lasted up until the mid to late 20th century. And even today, we can see an imbalance of French-Canadian to English-Canadian representation in Parliament and Cabinet. Now, it should be noted that this gap is lessening, and after the turn of the century, there seems to be less of a bias towards French-Canadians, but nonetheless, this is a discrepancy that French-Canadians take note of and take note of seriously. Finally, there is the issue that arises when the French Canadians try to preserve their culture that the English have tried so hard to assimilate out. French is a key aspect of the French Canadian culture, and up until very recently, there was a huge stigma around when to use French and how to use French. In fact, the Official Languages Act that made French an official language of Canada was only enacted in 1969, a mere 50 years ago. Furthermore, up until that point, French and Quebecois businesses were mandated by law to do business in English. This was to cater to the demographic of professional Canadians in the world, namely the English. Furthermore, even today, there is a large gap between the number of successful English Canadian businesses and the number of successful French Canadian businesses, and this is included on the global scale. In the end, the FLQ are criminals. There is no way to justify their actions on that October month, but using the criteria that I've just outlined, their motives can be justified. The nationalist and separatist movements of Quebec are nothing new. They've been around for years, and they will likely be around for years to come, and they do have reasons for doing what they would like to do. French Canadians are not often seen as equals in this country, even today, and it's no wonder that after 400 years of dealing with it, the metaphorical can burst, and it manifested in the October crisis. But all we can do now is take it as a historical lesson and not make the same mistakes that Canada of the past has made.